Hello everybody, I'm Mr. Zinzin. Today I tell you the most thrilling and horror-esque stories. Please subscribe, share and enjoy. As I lay in bed with my 2-year-old daughter, I watch her as she seems fixed on something at the end of my bed. I ask her if she's okay and she tells me she's scared. When I ask what of, she tells me of the scary man. I tell her there isn't a scary man, just you and mommy, but she tells me that there is a scary man standing right there. I ask her why is he scary and she tells me he bites her. This has happened tonight and we are now camped out on the sofa as I'm pretty freaked out. This isn't the first time it's happened. We've recently moved house and in my old house I have seen a man, but I didn't feel a negative energy the way I do now. I also don't have anybody close to me who has passed away. However, I feel my whole life I've been followed and never alone. My mom tells me I was a strange child who used to talk of a past life in vivid and descriptive detail and prefer to play alone from a very young age, and she would often hear me talking to no one in particular. Someone please help me. Is this just a 2-year-old who doesn't want to go to bed or something else? And if it is something else, what can I do? When I ask her if the man is gone, she tells me no, he's in my bedroom. She doesn't know his name and hasn't quite got the vocabulary to describe him. She told me one night he had a book. And on a different occasion she came running out of her room at about 3 a.m. saying the same thing. I told the man to go away. We don't have scary men in our house, and as I went to put her back in bed, the light, which I know was off, was on. This used to happen quite often in our old house too. I want to start by saying that I am for the most part skeptical of many paranormal claims. I personally feel that it is something people use because they want there to be more. That being said, I have experienced things of the paranormal variety. I am inclined to believe certain stories, things going bump in the night, rarely among the believable. I would say that I am a believer in the supernatural, though for the most part I try to explain things away with science, nature. I don't say any of this to come off as rude or to put others' experiences down. I'm merely giving you a sample of my personality and beliefs. I have had experiences since I was young. Maybe I'm sensitive or it's all merely coincidences? Honestly, I'm not entirely sure. The following will not be in chronological order but rather by place, age. Let's start out with my first experience. I say first because it is the first one I can vividly remember, though my mother told me that I had experiences while I was a baby. When I was about 5 or 6, my sister and I were sitting on our bunk bed watching cartoons across the room. My stepfather came in and turned the TV off and told us that we watched enough TV and we needed to continue to sit on our beds. So my sister and I start chatting, and out of the corner of my eye I notice what looks like a heat wave in front of our TV. I mention this to my sister and I think that maybe our TV got really hot. She says that she can see it too. All of a sudden the TV turns on, but when it turns on it's already on a completely different channel, not the one we were watching when it shut off. It started playing an American football game and the volume was all the way up, which it wasn't before. This next experience is in the same house but on the day we moved out. At this time I was around 9. After packing up almost all of our belongings, I was tasked with packing the last box. I was in the kitchen and was filling it with cups. My family went out to pack the truck, so I was by myself in the house. As I was bending over I felt a hand on my shoulder and lips against my ear. My name was whispered very quickly and I could even feel the hot breath against my ear. I quickly turned on my heels and looked around for anyone. That's when my little sister came running into the kitchen screaming if I was okay. I was stunned. I told her what happened and she was floored. She told me that she was walking along the side of the house when she says this old man's face looking at her from the window in the kitchen. She knew I was in there and was worried about me. After we had moved out, our mother told us that the previous tenant was an old man that had died in the house. We thought that he probably was the one who turned the TV on too. As my parents are divorced and had shared custody, my sister and I would travel between households. At my father's house he married a woman who already had 2 children from a previous marriage. I was about 7 and my eldest brother was 11. He had a sleepover one weekend and only the big kids could stay up to watch Goosebumps because it was too scary for little kids. being kids though my siblings and I would try and spy on my eldest brother and friends. We were pretending to be spies. It had come around to my turn to watch the enemies. As I peeked around the corner I was watching the three older boys watching TV while laying on their stomachs. I watched one boy get up and start head my way. I thought that he was going to use the restroom. That's when I noticed that it wasn't actually him as he was walking through himself. I look up at the boy's face but it was actually a man with no eyes. He had eye sockets but no eye. He kept walking towards me but when he saw that I looked at his face he smiled and stretched out his hand towards me like he wanted to take my hand. I screamed and closed my eyes as tight as I could and backed myself into the hallway wall. My dad came out and grabbed me, then I explained what happened. He told me that there are no such things as ghosts, only demons, and it's a good thing I didn't grab its hand or I would have been doomed. That scared me and has instilled a fear in me even to this day. Even though I am no longer religious I still feel fear when it comes to ghosts. I don't try to seek them out or try to communicate with them. Throughout my teenage years all experiences can be explained. When I got older and started moving around with my husband and child I started to experience things again. Maybe I had opened up somewhat. I still do not actively try and communicate with anything, some things just find me. I may submit my adult experiences. Though most of them weren't happening physically they were. Like a dream? I guess. I have always seen things that no one else seems to see. I live in a one-story house with an attic. My father built the house so I don't have to worry that anyone died in it before I came to live here. One of my earliest recollections would be when I was around the age of 3 years old. At the time my parents thought of this as nothing more than figments of my imagination, but they were too real to me. At night there would always be a woman in a white cotton nightdress with long dark hair that covered her face against the wall close to one of the doors. Next to the end of the bed, there would be a suit of armor without the head, usually. In between the both of these things would be a mass of black that would dart about but never get too close to either of the figures. After a few years I stopped seeing them and was able to peacefully sleep. The next one I remember would be around the age of 7. I started noticing that I would see these shadow people, animals out of the corner of my eye. Whenever I would turn to look at them they would either disappear or move out of my line of sight, and when investigating if they were still there I would find nothing. When I was younger I used to go across the street and spend the night with them. They had 2 little blonde-haired girls and a blonde-haired boy at the time. I was laying in between both the girls on the crevice of the 2 beds we had pushed together. They were both asleep and so was the little boy with their parents. I was looking out the door to the little bit of the hallway I could see when I saw a little girl who looked like the eldest girl from the back go into the room across the hall from me. I had heard their mom talking about how she would see this little girl walking around the house and didn't believe her, and now when I stay over there it feels strange to not see her disappear around corners and in rooms. The next thing would be with my nephew. He had been in his room playing before the family sat down for dinner. When he came in he said, "Mommy, there's a little boy in my room and he's sad." When questioned why the little boy was sad he replied, "Because his daddy died." 30 minutes later my nephew's dad went out to close the gate and was stabbed in the side. I was at home when we got the phone call and my mom rushed to the hospital. While sleeping I had a dream that he left and I wasn't going to see him again for a long time. When I awoke I knew that he had died before my mom told me. About a year ago I was sitting in the living room watching TV with my parents when I suddenly heard my radio in my bathroom come on. I thought nothing of it at the time and continued to watch TV. A few minutes later the radio went off and instead I heard what sounded like children giggling in the playroom. This time I got up to investigate and found nothing. I had recently stopped hearing or seeing anything and it stayed that way for a little over a month. Around 2 months ago I was laying in bed looking at my ceiling when I heard 3 loud bangs on my door. I got up to investigate and found that everyone was still asleep. 2 days later I was laying on my bed again and felt it be shoved and I was home alone at the time. I like to think those were the ghosts or whatever these things are telling me that they are still there. These sightings have continued through my life and I'm now 16 years of age. They don't scare me, but I would like to know if anyone else experienced this sort of thing as well. When I was really young, my parents, my infant brother, and I all lived in a house in Clarkston, Washington. This house was very old and bigger than any of the other houses we had lived in up to this point. At first the house seemed normal with no weird sightings or anything like that, but then when I was about 3 years old, I began to play with an imaginary friend. This was not unusual for me. I often had imaginary friends when I was a small child. This one was different though. For one thing, the imaginary friend's name was Selena, a name I had never heard before. Then I told my mom that Selena used to live here, and I told her that Selena was in a dead box. Now remember, I was only 3. I had never heard about death or coffins or anything, so that was unusual. I later told my mom that Selena was hot then cold, and then she was in a dead box. My dad later did some research on the house and found out that a long time ago a school stood where our house now stood, and that there was a fire that killed an entire classroom full of children. We have since then moved, and after that my parents told me that none of my other imaginary friends were like Selena. Although at the age of about 4 I would scare my parents by yelling about people who were not really there. All the information about Selena was provided by my mother, because I do not remember any of my childhood imaginary friends. So was this girl a spirit or just a little girl's imaginary friend? I believe it was a spirit. What do you think? I didn't realize how long this was going to be. Sorry if it's too long to read, I understand. I'm a writer, so I tend to get carried away with all the details, even the boring ones. But this is all very real and I had to let it out. I've never truly believed in ghosts or spirits until recently. You see, my grandparents moved into a new home about 2 years ago. They were in debt and lost their previous home in the country and decided to relocate closer to the rest of their family. With my grandparents, are 3 children. The first is their youngest son at 13 years old. Call him Joey. Yes, my mom has a 13-year-old brother. The other 2 are my cousins that they adopted because my uncle was too unfit to be a parent. Call them Allie, who is 12, and Scott, who is 8. Anyways, this story is more about them than it is about me. They lived there for about 3 months before it was Christmas Eve, where my entire family gets together to celebrate at my grandparents' house. Allie was in her bedroom with her 2 younger cousins who are both around 4 and 5. Up until this point there had been no problems. The girls had been in the room together, playing fine until Allie came running out with the 2 little ones, sobbing hysterically. Nobody could calm her down or get her under control. She has a history of being paranoid and frightened easily, as she was under the government's care a lot, so her freaking out isn't entirely out of the norm. Still, we had never seen her so terrified before. Once she was calm enough to speak, she told my grandmother that she had seen something in her room. A little girl, to be more specific. Our littlest cousin Cam, who is 4, had been standing in front of a play vanity and had been turned away from the mirror, staring at something behind Allie. Allie, who had been concerned for the 4-year-old, kneeled in front of her to see what was the matter and what she was staring at. But before she could even ask, Allie seen in the reflection of the mirror that there was a little girl in a white dress standing behind her. Thus, freaking out, grabbing both of the little girls and running out of the room in hysterics. Nobody took it seriously. Especially, because like I said, Allie has a history of being paranoid, which is normal after everything she's been through. My grandma assured her that it was nothing, but Allie was convinced of what she had seen and refused to enter her bedroom for the remainder of the night. I however was more skeptic, and a part of me did believe that she'd seen something because I'd seen the fear in her eyes and it wasn't normal. I took it upon myself to ask Cam what had happened, since nobody else had, her being 4 years old and all. After the incident she had clung to her mother for the rest of the night, refusing to leave her side. When I was able to get her alone, I asked her what she'd seen. Her only reply was, "A mask." I figured that she was little and the only way that she could describe what she had seen was relating it to the one thing that all little kids are afraid of: masks. For the rest of the night, that was it, and it all kind of went by forgotten. Now I can specifically remember the order of events that took place next. It's all sort of like a blur as strange things began happening. Small things, really. I visited my grandparents' house often and even stayed there during the week sometimes since it was near my college and convenient. Lights turning off, TVs shutting off for no reasons, things randomly falling, that sort of thing. Allie was constantly scared, and she showed it when these sort of occurrences took place. She became hysterical around me a few times and I had to hold her for a long time to try to calm her down. She also didn't like talking about the things going on, whatsoever. The boys were somewhat unaffected and knew about the small things but didn't seem very convinced or bothered as they shared a room and were oblivious. My grandpa was ignorant and my grandmother to the very core of her soul refused to believe that such a thing could be possible. She believed that since the home was older, it was nothing more than electricity problems. I experienced my first dose of these strange occurrences one night when my 8-year-old sister Lily spent the night. My 13-year-old brother also stayed the night but he slept with the boys while me and Lily slept in Allie's room. Me, being the oldest cousin and all decided that I'd take the twin bed while the two of them made a comfortable bed on the floor. However, I woke up in the middle of the night around 2 or 3 a.m. I laid there for a few moments, motionless before realizing that I had to use the restroom. When I returned, I checked on the girls to find that they were still peacefully asleep before laying in the bed and trying to go back to sleep myself. My eyes were closed when I heard a small, tiny voice clearly say, "Mommy, I'm tired." I was so terrified that I couldn't move. It took me a while before I could lift my head to check on the girls again and see if one of them had said it. But they were both still in a deep sleep. Convincing myself that it was one of Allie's silly, talking toys, I forced myself to go back to sleep. I told Allie about it the next morning and she was convinced that she had no toys whatsoever that talked. She said that she had cleaned out her room before moving and gave away all her babyish, talking toys to our little cousin Cam. We raided her room for the rest of the day looking for any explanation as to what the voice could have been. And like she had said, we found nothing and I was left rattling my brain and wondering if I had been half awake. But a part of me is still sure of what I had heard that night. Later on that week I had been in the backyard, playing fetch with my dog when the next door neighbor, an older man, had stood next to the gated fence to be friendly and ask about my dog. After discussing our dogs for a few minutes, he somehow later went on to tell me about how the piece of land my grandparents had moved on had once been a park. But after some time, a home had been built onto that piece of land and that home had been tragically ruined in a fire. So the landlord that was currently renting the home out to my grandparents, bought it and rebuilt it. I was baffled and suddenly a lot of things made sense. He didn't know if there had been any casualties as he hadn't lived in his home at the time, only heard about it. I tried telling my grandma, but she continued to not believe and eventually we all decided to stop talking about and to ignore the small incidents that occurred. But they still happened unfortunately. When Allie was in the boys' room, watching them play video games one afternoon, the bottom mattress to the boys' bunk bed flew up in the air before falling back down. All three of them claimed this happened and came out just as hysterical as Allie had been the first day she'd seen that little girl. Me and my boyfriend spent the night in Allie's room with her sleeping on the ground and both woke up to the sound of someone whispering in our ear. Allie was helping my grandma bring in groceries through the garage when the garage door was suddenly closing on them. The button on the garage door has to be held in order for it to go down. My little sister was over at my grandparents' just last weekend, watching TV with Allie in the living room at night when she claims to have seen a figure walking by. A girl in a white gown. She called to the figure, thinking it was our grandma, but when she entered the kitchen nobody was there. When Allie and Scott fell asleep on the couch one night, Scott woke up screaming and claiming that something was biting his toes. Things seemed to be getting worse and more physical, especially towards Allie, who will try to go to sleep in her room but sometimes come out into the living room quietly with her blanket to sleep on the couch. She doesn't like talking about it, but she recently opened up to me that sometimes when she tries to sleep in the room, she feels something on her back. something touching her back and almost like a breath on her neck. I'm worried about her, and I talked to my friend who is more in tune with this stuff, and she believes that this spirit is latching onto Ali because it's feeding off her fear. Or because it's also a little girl who is clinging to her. I have no idea, and I honestly don't know what to do because I've never dealt with anything like this before, and I'm worried about Ali, who is in a constant state of fear in this home. She's been through enough in her life, and my grandma is too stubborn to think of this as real, but we've all experienced it. Granted, Ali's been there every time something has happened to anyone and is the common denominator. If you've gotten this far, do you have any thoughts? Advice? I'd really appreciate it. When I was 2 years old, my mother used to set me on the counter in the bathroom while she did her makeup and hair to keep an eye on me in the mornings. She said I often liked to make faces in the mirror and giggle at myself, like a normal toddler. However, one morning, she said I was looking into the mirror which was opposite of the bathtub, and I smiled and pointed into the mirror, which reflected the opposite side of the room. She asked me what I was pointing at, and I replied, "There's a man in the bathtub." This didn't alarm her because as she could see there was no other person in the bathroom except for us. Besides, a 2-year-old has an active imagination. She thought nothing of it until some time later. 2 years later, when I was 4 and my younger brother was 2, my mother had my brother in the bathroom with her. He sat on the counter like I had before, only he didn't often look in the mirror. He would play with my mom's makeup brushes or powders while she was doing her makeup and hair. One day, while sitting on the counter, he dropped the brush he had been playing with and started giggling. My mom asked him why he was laughing, noticing that he was staring directly behind her. "Mama, there's a man in the bathtub," he said, pointing to the part of the room behind her. My mother instantly froze in horror, recalling the time I had mentioned this thing to her 2 years prior. She turned around, expecting to find a person standing behind her, but found nothing. She is convinced to this day that children are able to see things that adults can no longer see, and my brother and I saw the ghost of a man who had passed away in the house from a heart attack years before we moved in. However, before hearing this story, for some reason every time I was in the bathroom I had to have the shower curtain open because of a never-ending feeling of being watched. This happened many years ago as my son was only 2.5 years old. I believe that he had a connection with my gram, who passed right around the time I got pregnant with him. He knew things that he shouldn't have that only my gram would know. Anyways, as I was saying, he was around 2.5 years old and I had 3-month son as well. The way our house at the time was set up was my husband and my room was connected to my children's room with no door. One night, my husband and I were sleeping when we both woke up to what we thought was our son saying hello. We turned on the light and looked around and he wasn't there. He was in his bed fast asleep, and of course our baby was not talking. It creeped us out, but we just brushed it off. From that night on he would not sleep in his bedroom. He would sleep in the living room by himself or in our bed, but not his. Even when my husband and I tried laying in his bed with him, he would not sleep in there. It was a nightmare to not know how to help him or even know what he was going through. We tried everything and he wouldn't talk about it. So about 4 months later my mother-in-law wanted to come stay with us and our landlord had a bigger house come open, so we did move. He was fine in that house. And of course we never dared talked about anything with this to him or in front of him. A few years later, he and I were just sitting around talking and coloring, and he looked at me and said, "Mommy, do you remember when we lived in that one house and that old man and little boy would come visit me? That old man took pictures of me and that little boy, all he would say to me was hello." I was pretty freaked out. My landlord at the time ended up selling that house, so we had to move again. At the new place we had heard that a woman was said to have killed her husband there. And my son would see a man in a long black coat and a black hat walking around. Although he never bothered my son, I'm not sure where to begin in this story. I've never shared it with anyone outside my family. I guess I can start with what happened tonight. My family was sitting at the table eating and my niece starts talking about the Poinsees. This isn't the first time she's mentioned them, and at first we thought it was just her imagination. She's a very vivid and animated 3-year-old with an extensive vocabulary, but sporadically over the past year her story has never wavered. She describes these creature things that are all white, no hair, no face, no eyes, no mouth, but they can still talk to her. At first we thought maybe it was something she had seen on a commercial for a cartoon or something, but she started crying saying that they scare her. They only talk to her and Bonky. Bonky is an all-black figure that lives in our clock in the living room. After talking about them for a little while she went without mentioning them for a good 4 months. Then one day randomly came bolting up the hallway screaming that the Pointsies are going to get me. The look on her face was one of pure terror, but again, nothing about them or Bonky until tonight. She said they were standing on her grandmother's TV dancing. She imitated the dance, which was more of a weird crawl. We asked her are they nice, and she said they are nice, but they just scare me and I want them to go away and never come back. There have been strange instances in the house as well. It's my mother, my sister, my niece living in the house, and one night I was in my room and everybody else was in my mom's room. My mom's room is right beside mine and you can see if anyone comes in or out of her room from mine. We started to smell something burning. I went in my mom's room and asked was anybody cooking and forgot something in the oven, and nobody had been. I walked into the kitchen to see a candle, the big 3-wick heavy candles, had been turned on its side and was still lit. I blew the candle out but didn't think much of it until no one had been anywhere near the kitchen since the candle was lit. A couple nights later, my mom was laying in her bed watching TV and all of a sudden felt a slight pressure on her leg. She looked down and one of my niece's toys, the little green thing from Yo Gabba Gabba, was sitting on her leg looking at her. It's lived in the toy bin since. My sister gets bad migraines once in a blue moon and she'll usually shower with the lights off to help ease the tension of them. One of those nights she was in the shower with all the lights off and the door closed and she heard breathing. Thinking it was my mom or myself that had come into the bathroom to get something, she didn't think anything of it until she opened her eyes and saw a faint figure with a red ember like someone was in there smoking a cigarette. She freaked out and turned on the lights, but there was nothing there. I've heard a growl from another room on one occasion and just other small instances. Most of it I can overlook and possibly write off as a weird happening or just a freak thing, but am I being too nonchalant about this? Is this something that I need to be worried about? Our granddaughter Shanae often spends a weekend at our house since her mother's demise 2 years ago. Shanae has a history of seeing or knowing things, with the result that I tend to believe what she says. One weekend night, Shanae was safely tucked up in bed and asleep, or so I thought. I had let Zeus, our black Labrador, indoors and given him his nightly bone before retiring to the bedroom. My husband Ray was still at his PC playing his war games, wearing his headphones. I was just about to climb into bed when I heard a soft cry, "Mom." She calls me Mom. I pricked up my ears as the sound had been soft and I thought that I was hearing things. The cry came again, this time a bit louder. I hastily donned my slippers and gown and dutifully rushed to Shanae's room down the passage. I found a trembling little girl, sitting up in bed. Without switching on the light, I sat down beside her and put my arms around her shoulders. Naturally, I asked what was wrong. The answer I got surprised me. "Mom, I can hear footsteps." "Really?" I replied. "Where?" "Coming from the kitchen." "I think," came the quivering reply. I listened intently but heard no footsteps. I asked her if she could still hear them. The answer was yes. Again, I listened carefully. All I could hear was Zeus chomping away at his big bone in the lounge. I let out a peal of laughter, realizing that Zeus' rhythmical gnawing did indeed sound like footsteps. After explaining to Shanae the source of the sounds, she settled down with a giggle and went to sleep. The following sleepover weekend we had an almost repeat performance. This time, there was a noise in her bedroom, right next to her bed. This time I switched on the light, searching for the source of the sound which so terrified my little girl. "What did it sound like?" I asked. "Like 2 feet in slippers stomping on my carpet," one after the other came the reply. Puzzled, I bent down to inspect the carpet. All I could see were Shanae's slippers, neatly next to her bed, plus a clothes hanger. Thoughts whirled around in my mind for a second or two, and then I asked, "Did you forget the hanger on your bed?" "Yes," came the drawn-out answer, in a tiny voice. At once, I knew that I had solved the mystery. The hanger had fallen off the bed, first one end landing on the carpet, then the other. I demonstrated to Shanae what had happened. After that, we both had a good laugh. On the night of Friday 2nd May, I was called because Shanae said that it felt like someone was watching her from outside the window. This I took far more seriously. I asked if she could see anything. Her answer was in the affirmative. She said it looked like a big black shadow. I opened the curtains to see if anything was causing a shadow to be cast on the curtains, but there was nothing in front of the streetlight. I closed the curtains again, making sure that there was no chink of light coming through. Shanae was still extremely uneasy, saying that she felt very scared. I switched on her nightlight, which she has never used before except to get a drink of water. This still did not appease the little soul. I tried explaining away her feelings, but to no avail. Eventually, I took her hands in mine and prayed. I called on the saints to protect her and guard her while she slept. I called on the spirit of her mother too. If this did not work, I figured on lighting an incense stick of dragon's blood for her to smudge the room, but luckily, it wasn't necessary. After the prayers, she managed to settle down and sleep peacefully. Of course, I have no idea if what Shanae was feeling was real, or just in her imagination, but I wasn't taking any chances. If it scared her, it was real to her. Fortunately, she has had no further incidents. We still joke about the hanger on her bed though. I have always had some sort of feeling of spirits around me, but last year I experienced something I never thought I would. I was sitting on my stairs with my partner having a smoke and chat after getting kids to sleep and happened to glance in the window which looked straight into my kitchen, and at my table with her head lowered was my mum wearing a pink housecoat, or so I thought for a split second, until it dawned on me it was 10 to 12 at night on a calm September evening. Without even thinking I said to my partner that someone was in our kitchen, but at that moment I looked round to the kitchen and saw nothing, looked back to window and she was there again. Safe to say my partner thought I was overtired and laughed. I was getting really frustrated as I could plainly see this woman like I could see my partner. Then frustration turned to slight fear as I didn't know why she was here, and at that when I looked at the window again she was gone. Since then I have felt spirits around me and sometimes hear very faint voices, but nothing like that night. I have now moved to a new house and are once again experiencing something, except this time I feel it may cause harm to my youngest and eldest child. It began 4 weeks ago with my 2-year-old son saying over and over again "the lady." Then at 6:30 a.m. on a Tuesday morning he awoke screaming, "The lady," and pointing to my eldest daughter's room, and the fear on his face I can only hope I will never see again. My partner tried calming him, but he just clung on to me so hard and made me go to the kitchen. We were there for 30 minutes before entering the living room. Now he is saying, "The boy mummy," and runs to his room, climbs up to his window and says something that scares me. The wee boy pushed window die nanny. Even now writing this is sending shivers down my spine. He is always saying, "The boy and Eddie," but when I ask him about the little boy he puts his finger to his mouth and says, "Hush mummy, no." Today 22nd July 4th, scratches or what looks a lot like little burn blisters have appeared on his right hand and bruises have appeared on my eldest daughter's right arm. Since moving here my eldest daughter, who is 15, experiences tightening on her head just before my son says "the boy mummy." When I go to leave the house without him he cries, "Don't leave me mummy Eddie." Also if my 8-month-old cat is left in the hall herself she cries and hisses until you go and get her. Please can you help, as I am getting quite scared now and normally experiences with the spirit world I love and feel safe, but my fear is for my kids. Thanks Laura.